Have you ever heard of the model who didn't just wear couture? She made couture happen? Bettina Graziani walked into a young Givenchy's first show in 1952 and changed everything. She wasn't just a face. She became the voice, the spark, the reason he got noticed. Stick around, because what she did next rewrote fashion history. Long before the flashbulbs and Parisian ateliers, Simone Micheline Baudin wasn't a fashion icon. She was a teenager in wartime France, stuffing rationed cigarettes into her jacket sleeves, dreaming of something that didn't feel like survival. She worked as a railway clerk. Can you picture that? A future muse of haute couture punching time cards at a train station. France was still reeling from the war. The city that would later worship her, Paris, was still quiet, still wounded. And yet somehow, in the middle of all that, she kept staring at fashion magazines like they were escape hatches. She wasn't tall. Her cheekbones weren't yet legendary, but she had something better: instinct. Not just about style, but about where culture was about to move. By 1946, she'd changed her name. Bettina. Just one name. Clean. Bold. Easy to remember. That wasn't marketing. That was survival. Reinvention was her armor. Every model around her looked like someone trying to be elegant. Bettina? She looked like someone who already had nothing to prove. And here's what people forget. She didn't start at the top. Her first big break came with Jacques Fath. Not Dior, not Balenciaga. Fath was the outlier. Less mainstream, more playful. But that's what made Bettina fall into place. She wasn't designed for stiff elegance. She brought movement, energy, the kind of charisma that made even a mid-tier dress look expensive just because she wore it like it mattered. She wasn't the face of Paris yet, but the city had started to notice. Magazines, ad campaigns. Suddenly her profile was everywhere. Not overstyled, not artificial. She felt modern, effortless. She didn't walk into a room and suck out the air. She walked in, and people breathed differently. And then, in 1952, something shifted. A young designer, timid, unknown, barely 25, was about to launch his first collection. He needed someone bold to carry it. Not just wear it, carry it. Not someone who looked expensive, someone who could make things look expensive. That's when Bettina met Hubert de Givenchy, and everything changed. Let's rewind to 1952. Givenchy's name meant nothing yet. He was 25, broke, and renting out a small atelier. The fabric, cotton, the ambition, massive. But the odds? Not in his favor. Now here comes Bettina. Already a name in Paris, but not the kind of model who shows up, poses, and leaves. She was sweeping floors, ironing dresses, making calls, setting up benches before guests arrived. Not because she was desperate, because she knew something was about to shift. And she wanted in on the ground floor. The first collection was chaos. Nothing fancy, nothing rich. But the moment Bettina walked out in a simple white blouse and skirt, everything snapped into place. That blouse wasn't meant to be a statement. It just was, and it worked. Editors noticed. Buyers paid attention. The room got quiet, then loud. Givenchy didn't wait. He named the blouse after her. He named the whole collection after her. And Bettina, she kept working, answering phones, calling photographers, roping in friends to model for free. She wasn't just wearing the clothes. She was keeping the whole operation moving while the paint on the walls was still drying. People like to say Givenchy launched Bettina. It's actually the other way around. The Bettina blouse started appearing in editorials. Magazine editors circled her photo and asked, "Who's the designer?" It didn't hurt that she had the confidence to wear separates like they belonged in couture. She made those basic cotton pieces feel like something you'd save up months to afford. And it wasn't a one-time thing. She stuck around, helped shape every show that came after. She wasn't some temporary muse, she was part of the engine. While other models were out partying, Bettina was sorting lookbooks and calling the press. She worked, and it paid off. After that first Givenchy show, Bettina didn't drop back into the usual model routine. She leaned in. She kept working in his studio, long after the press left. Copy editors still scribbling headlines, she answered phones, made introductions, whispered suggestions over the rack. No one else had that kind of access to a brand new designer, but she did. And they both felt it. Givenchy later said she was more than a muse. She was a collaborator. That blouse she wore, it became his identity, not just her moment. Vogue, Life, Figaro, they all picked it up. She was walking advertisements, but not in the way others did. Her energy meant people stopped and paid attention without feeling sold to. Through the early 50s, she was everywhere, posing for Dior, Chanel, Valentino, but always circling back to Givenchy. She'd be in Rome today, Paris tomorrow, New York the next week, all in constant motion, stitching together his network without ever crowing about it. Her job wasn't glamorous, it was operations, it was PR, it was make sure everyone goes home remembering the clothes and the name. That's not what models usually do, but Bettina did, and it worked. By 1953, Givenchy was no longer unknown. He was on the fashion radar. His name closed doorways at Barney's and Bergdorf Goodman. Bettina had carried his work across the channel, words that might have floated away without her effort. Some models have big faces. Bettina had one plus stamina, strategy, and drive. She knew how the industry hung together, and she didn't just perform, she built. Their partnership lasted 2 years, intense, brief, electrifying. But like all good runs, it left a mark far beyond just those months. The foundation was laid, the reputation built, and the surname Givenchy got legs and wings because she brought both. After 1954, something shifted. The dresses kept coming, but Bettina's world was pulling her in a different direction. She'd married Gilbert Benno Graziani, a Paris match photographer, and before long she was back in the headlines for reasons far from the runway. That romance didn't last long. It ended not with tragedy, but tension. She was hungry for more than silk and spotlights. Enter Peter Viertel, the American screenwriter. He left his pregnant wife for Bettina. That's when she learned something Paris couldn't teach her. Fame doesn't always look glamorous. It looks messy. Their whirlwind affair made waves, but Bettina never lost her composure. She just moved on. And then came 1955. Prince Ali Khan, playboy, diplomat, headline maker, swept in. He proposed. She said yes. But that engagement turned into something else entirely. Her retirement. She stopped modeling, just like that. No grand farewell, no Vogue send-off. She stepped quietly out of the public eye to be part of something bigger, a life beyond fashion. Their love story didn't end like those cinematic romances. In 1960, they were in a car crash. Ali Khan didn't make it. Bettina survived, but the loss went deeper than what anyone could see. Their future together, the one they'd started building, ended that night. And just like that, the private wounds became public tragedy. Instead of fading away, Bettina shifted gears again. She wrote poetry. She composed songs. She became a behind-the-scenes force in fashion PR, working alongside Ungaro and Valentino. She stayed close to the world she loved, but on her own terms. She reappeared at Chanel in 1967, just for a night, to show she hadn't vanished. Coco told her off the cuff to skip weekend meals. Bettina chuckled later. It was fun doing it once, but I will never do it again. And decades later, France recognized her. In 2010, she was named a Commander of Arts and Letters, something she found touching but almost unbelievable. That's Bettina. Not just a model, not just a muse. Someone who kept pivoting, redefining success long after the camera stopped clicking, and carrying every version of herself forward. Bettina had left the catwalks. She wasn't on magazine covers anymore. But somehow, she was still everywhere. Not literally, but in attitude, in silhouette, in the way models started to behave, and designers started to think. See, Bettina had introduced something back in the 50s that stuck around long after the flashbulbs faded, the working model. The one who showed up early, stayed late, asked smart questions, and treated the runway like a job, not a party. She didn't demand red carpets. She demanded respect. And that changed the dynamic in the room. Designers like Valentino, Emmanuel Ungaro, even Saint Laurent, they all orbited around that energy. Bettina had shown what it looked like when a model actually became part of the process, not a mannequin, a collaborator. That wasn't the norm back then. But after her, people started expecting more, both from the models and from the houses themselves, and she didn't push it. She wasn't out here writing manifestos or doing tell-all interviews. Bettina played the long game. After the tragedy with Ali Khan, she kept a low profile, but she didn't disappear. She worked on press campaigns, art projects, even costume design, quietly, efficiently. She wasn't clinging to her past. She was building something else, and Paris noticed. She'd walk into certain rooms, private showings, charity galas, fashion retrospectives, and you'd see it. Younger models would lean in, not to gawk, but to learn. The way she held herself, the way she answered questions. Bettina had become the kind of woman people referenced without even realizing it. Her name was shorthand for a certain type of elegance, but also a certain work ethic, a no-nonsense cool. And even though she didn't crave the spotlight, it kept circling back. Magazines would reach out for retrospectives. Designers would name-check her in interviews. Every time someone tried to reinvent the modern woman, her image crept back in. Those sharp eyes, that posture, the sense that she was never trying to impress anyone. What Bettina left behind wasn't a brand. It wasn't a memoir or a makeup line. It was a standard. A way of doing the job that made everyone else rethink how serious the job could be. And that sticks. By the 1980s and 90s, the fashion world had turned itself inside out. Supermodels were becoming rock stars. Designers were now celebrities. Shows were bigger, louder, faster. And Bettina? She wasn't trying to keep up. She didn't need to. But the weird thing was, people still kept talking about her. Her photo would resurface in an editorial, or someone would reference the Bettina blouse without even realizing who Bettina was. That's how deep she'd been baked into the industry. The new guard, Linda, Naomi, Christy, they were a different breed. But they owed more to Bettina than they probably realized. She'd already cracked the code on being visible without being loud. And eventually, the culture caught up to her. In 2004, the Musée Galliera held a retrospective on fashion photography. There she was, front and center in black and white, posing not like a statue but like someone mid-thought. Real, grounded, powerful. People started asking, wait, who was she again? Fashion insiders already knew. But a new generation was seeing her for the first time and realizing she wasn't just a footnote in Givenchy's story. She was the story, the face, the hands, the voice behind the curtain. She gave a few interviews in those later years, always brief, always sharp. She'd talk about her time in fashion with this kind of calm distance, grateful, but not sentimental. When asked if she missed modeling, she once said, "I never modeled." I just wore clothes and got photographed. That was her, understated to the bone. And maybe that's why she aged with dignity. While others chased relevance, Bettina kept her pace. She wasn't trying to stay in the conversation. She didn't need validation from a Vogue anniversary issue or some new campaign revival. Her work was already done. It was living in archives, in museum catalogs, in old tear sheets still taped to studio walls. The fashion world loves reinvention, but what it quietly respects even more is consistency. And Bettina had it. From a train clerk in France to a model who shaped a generation without ever yelling about it. That's why her passing in 2015 hit harder than anyone expected. She hadn't been in the spotlight for decades, but when she was gone, you felt it. Because even if you didn't know her name, you'd seen what she left behind. Before the word supermodel got plastered across covers and contracts, before agencies turned runway girls into global brands, Bettina had already done it. Just not with a megaphone. She didn't invent the modeling industry, but she changed how people respected it. In the 1940s and early 50s, modeling was still thought of as temporary, a pretty girl's job, something to do until you found a husband, or until someone younger came along. Bettina blew past that timeline. She worked like it was a career, because for her, it was. She knew the names of editors. She handled press. She showed up early, stayed later, and tracked what photos ran where. That's normal now, sure. But back then, it wasn't. Most models didn't know how their image was being used, let alone negotiate around it. Bettina did. She didn't build a personal brand the way we'd describe it today, but she was a brand. People in Paris said her name like a shorthand. If a designer said, "I want a Bettina type," they weren't talking about a look. They meant confidence, reliability, the way someone could bring a whole room to attention just by stepping onto a set. And yeah, she modeled for the biggest names: Balenciaga, Chanel, Fath, Givenchy. But she wasn't just cycling through looks. She studied how they were made. She paid attention to draping, construction, silhouette. She could talk fabric and line with anyone in the room, and often did. Even male designers who ran the show would sometimes defer to her in fittings. They knew. She had the eye. She wasn't just there to wear the dress. She understood what it was supposed to do, and how it would live on the page. This was decades before models were expected to do interviews or represent a brand. Bettina had already figured out how to live the brand, how to give it a voice without speaking. And that kind of professionalism, that caught on. You look at someone like Linda Evangelista or Christy Turlington, and you see it. Total control of their image, but also an understanding of their role in the system. That didn't come from nowhere. It came from women like Bettina, who worked it all out without anyone handing them a playbook. By the time most people fade from the fashion scene, their image fades with them. The photos look dated. The hair, the makeup, the poses. They all end up feeling like artifacts. But Bettina? Her photos still feel alive. There's that one image. Maybe you've seen it. Bettina in profile, wearing a ruffled blouse, head turned, gaze halfway to somewhere else. It's not posed. It just is. And that right there, that's what stuck. Because Bettina wasn't trying to create a look. She was the look. Designers, photographers, stylists. Decades later, they'd still use her as a visual reference. Not to copy her exactly, but to bring back that energy. Poised, confident, not trying too hard, but impossible to ignore. Her body language was always just a little off script. A tilt of the head, a slightly crooked wrist. Something that made you pause. And it translated. In editorials, on mood boards, in museum exhibitions. She became part of fashion's internal vocabulary. Even people who didn't know her name could point to her silhouette and say, "That's it." That's the feeling. That's rare. She also became one of those figures that photographers loved talking about, especially the old school ones. They'd mention her in the same breath as Davima, Lisa Fonsagreves, and Susie Parker. But there was always a pause after her name, because Bettina didn't fit neatly into the usual model stories. She wasn't tragic. She wasn't scandalous. She didn't burn out. She just kept her distance, kept her dignity, and let the work speak for itself. There's a kind of legacy that gets written in headlines and documentaries. And then there's the quiet kind, the kind that floats through studio conversations and whispered references. That's Bettina's lane. And when you look at the way the industry still tries to replicate that effortless French elegance, what they're really reaching for is a Bettina moment. Clean lines, natural posture, an absence of theater, just presence. She didn't need to post reminders or stage a comeback. The image never left. Bettina never fought to be remembered. She just lived in a way that made it inevitable. You won't find her face plastered on tote bags or reissued in fragrance campaigns, but you'll feel her. Every time a model brings intellect to a casting call, every time a designer talks about timeless simplicity and actually means it. She didn't chase fashion. She defined what it looked like when it matured. And the industry, whether it admits it or not, still moves in the outline she left behind. If this gave you a new lens on fashion history, hit that like button. It helps more than you think. And if you want more stories like this, ones that go deeper than the surface, subscribe. We've got a lot more coming. Because some names get forgotten, and some rewrite the rules quietly. Bettina Graziani? She didn't just wear the clothes. She made everyone else level up.